Like Kristen said, my name is Mary Michelle Moore, and I'm the Instructional Technologies Librarian and Liaison to the Sciences. And I just wanted to share this lesson plan that I've used with mostly my biology seniors. So it came out of a few different lessons, and it's sort of an informal sharing. I'm part of the instruction librarian section for Southern California, and we do a share and learn. So my presentation's based more on that than anything else. So please jump in with your questions as we go. I have made a bit.ly for this chat, and I can move this over. This will put you into my lesson plans folder, so you can take a look afterwards, and I'll be taking you through what we're doing. I will need to make a copy in one of them because I have students' names and things, so I may have to clear something out of there, but feel free to take a look. But it'll take you to this slide deck, and then you can click and get to the lesson plans whenever you like. And as Kristen said, ask me questions as we go, and let's go ahead and get started. So some basics about this lesson. I can't see my tabs. Okay, that's not the one I want yet. Okay. All right, so this is, let's get to the lesson plan first. So this is a lesson plan that I've taught twice, and it came out of a request from one of my biology faculty where the students are going to be doing independent research on topics of their choice, but roughly related to climate change. So they get climate change, and then they can choose anything within that to do some work. But the professor herself is a botanist, and so we were doing a lot of botany and climate change. And one of the pain points for the students the first time we taught this together was they were finding things on Twitter in particular about more about climate change deniers than about climate change, but they wanted to know how to cite that information and how they could actually use that in the course of their research. So what that turned into was a way to look at what social media is, how the information is transmitted, and then how to get back to news articles and into the primary literature from the news articles, because we have a real dichotomy that the students sometimes get into with primary scholarly research always good and secondary research and news articles always bad when it comes to science. And we all know that the truth is somewhere in between there. And putting this lesson together gave me an opportunity to talk to the students, especially in their last couple of semesters, about the types of science research that they're going to be presented with in the real world. So not all of them are going to go on to be biologists, but everybody's going to go out and see a science news article somewhere, and they may want to remember how to find information from what they were looking at, or how to get back to the primary source from that, or just, how often have I been in my car, heard something on NPR, right, and then gone to find the study. So that aligned really well with some of our department's program learning outcomes for lifelong learners. And it was also a chance to put this class on a similar setting, a step beyond what we do with them as juniors. So in a junior level class, we go over primary, secondary, and tertiary sources, and this is a way to expand on that. And the reason we originally went with tweets when we get into the actual lesson plan, again, was it was something that students had seen. One of the shortcomings we did find, however, is that a lot of students don't use Twitter. So I had a few students who were really into this idea, and then I had a lot of students who were sort of looking at me like, why would I even be in this? So that might be something, if you're considering adapting this for your own classes, maybe find another social media outlet or see what else might happen. So in terms of the actual lesson plan, you see it on the screen right now. It's for an hour-long, 75-minute long information literacy session, so a one-shot. You could probably do it in an hour. My initial assumption was that this was going to be somewhat of a flipped assignment or students some pre-work. The students for homework were supposed to either look at the Biology Research Guide's primary research tab, or hopefully I had seen them either as a transfer student during orientation or had seen them in one of their junior level classes where we have them physically sort primary research articles, secondary news articles, and tertiary encyclopedia articles into different categories. That didn't work so well. The professor forgot to assign the reading, so it became more of a reinforcement to go and read that information, but I had seen most of them as juniors. And it was still an opportunity for class discussion. So if we look at, these are the slides that I use in class, and I always give them our, this is what we're going to be doing today. And then I draw a chart on the board that looks like this, only empty. And I have the students still in this chart with me. It's an opportunity to do conversation with them. So when they are first coming into class, they have the empty grid, and we go through and we talk about the attributes of each of these, and we talk about how a scholarly article can be a primary or secondary source. We talk about the purpose and the authors, and the benefit of doing this as a discussion in front of a class is you can correct some misassumptions that maybe you would miss if you're just having them review on their own. It's also just a way to sort of get the class warmed up and working together, because the actual sort back from the tweet to the primary source, I have them do as group work. So they're already sort of talking. It takes some of the pressure off, just sort of sitting in a lecture, which is always great. I've borrowed this particular table in way of explaining different types of similar but different resources from a speech class that I taught when I was an adjunct at Cal State San Marcos. So thank you for Allie for that. And it's a good way to get things sort of started and get students in the idea of we're not just going to go in the database and look for articles. I do assume by the time they get to me that they can do a basic keyword search, and so far that assumption has proven correct. I don't really do database demonstrations. I think students can learn better if they try for a little and then get to point of need, and then I can walk around, and as I see common problems, I'll display it on at the front of the room from the podium. But for the most part, I try to give them hands-on activities and get them in and working on. The amount of time this actually takes is going to depend on your students, and classrooms always have a great variety of learners in them. So the first time I did this, it went at a pretty good pace, and they were working in actual groups. The second time I made some modifications, and I'll show you what those look like, and they were a little bit slower. It could have also just been one was in the fall and one was in the spring. Could be a lot of reasons, but it's really just going to depend on your students and the makeup of the classroom, how long this will actually go through. We had great discussion when I put this up on the board, flipping through my notes. And then once this has been filled out, once we've answered some questions, we transition to the activity. The activity, what the students see looks like this. Our room's divided up into 4 workstations of 8 students where each of them have a computer. So dividing them into 4 groups works really easily. They are given the directions here, and I read them out. Students don't always read directions, I found. So in future iterations, I know to hit this a little bit harder. And then once they're here, the first iteration I did, they had a group slide deck, which looked a lot like this, and you can see some of the work they were doing. They were given a link within the slide deck to a doc that they could work on as a group, and they were given links. So they would be given a link, say, to this tweet, and they were given a generic citation for the end references to follow for how to cite this, and then they could then click the news article. They're taken to the news article about climate change in the national parks. And in here, if I recall this correctly, they did an interview with some individuals from the National Park Service and some of the studies that were being done. So then they would look for clues within this article to go to the, let me get back here, asking them some basic, what's it about, what do you know? To go to the National Parks Response Center and find information on the report that was mentioned. And in this case, it was just find a report of interest. In one of the other groups, it was to find a specific article written by one of the professors interviewed. And it went pretty well. One problem that came up with the slide deck is you could see there were a few clicks, right? So they went from slide deck to group document, back to the slide deck, and then they were supposed to put their responses here. Couple of things that went wrong. They got a little excited and started deleting each other's work. Again, some of them didn't read directions, and instead of being able to see the start here, some of them got really excited and went on Twitter and tried to find the most exciting tweet that they could when they saw do a tweet citation. So I changed it in the spring, and we went to a forum, and I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. The other thing that happened with students is as you can see, when somebody else comes into the Google Docs, there's a little animal up here, and they got very excited trying to figure out which animal they were rather than working on the actual assignment. So that's the downside to using a slide deck, is they can erase things and they can get a little excited and distracted. One thing that works really well in doing group work in a slide deck, though maybe not for this particular assignment, is they had a real sense of working in a group. This gets lost a little bit when we switch to working in a form. So when I taught it again, this was taught in the spring. When I taught it again in the fall, we used a Google form. They had a little bit of a harder time with that. They went and, we'll go into that in just a moment. But for this one, they accidentally deleted each other's work. They got a little distracted, but as you're walking around the room, it's much easier to see from the slide and from the doc where the students are in this activity. So it gives you some opportunities for formative assessment to kind of get a feel for what students are doing, how they're working. If they're chatting with each other, they can then sort of learn from each other what's going on and what's working well for them. Most of them, let me take you to the National Parks site. I'm sure you've all seen it, but just so you can see what the students see. Sorry, the tabs are not, where did my, there we go. And you can see I gave them links to go to the individual resources I wanted them to work on. Oh, sorry, my phone is ringing. I gave them the actual things to work on. And so once they got here, a lot of times they weren't quite sure what to do. They weren't used to looking yet for resources that weren't in a database. They know how to work in the library. They know what a database looks like. I don't think it's occurred to many of them to look for documents in, like where it would be here in the National Park Service. So they didn't necessarily try to go to the videos and multimedia or the science impacts. Some of them did try to search. but a lot of them aren't used to looking for research here, which I thought was a missed opportunity, and it's something I'm going to be talking about with my faculty, particularly as some of the students go through, because I see them a lot of times junior and senior years, but this might be something that might be good to get in for them early. And I know my earth sciences classes do it, and I think I assume maybe too much familiarity in my biology classes, and most of them aren't taking earth science since they've already fulfilled the science general education requirements. So that all went pretty well, and then after they've found a report, they're then supposed to take their report that they found from the National Park Service and go into, we put them mostly in green file, or we have a subscription to Bio1, one of the science databases of their choice, and find an article similar to the report they found. So this they're all much more familiar with. It went much quicker, and then it's basic keyword search. So that all went remarkably well. Then when I redid this in the fall of this year, I kept the same basic information. I kept the same activity. In this case, it was 399 or 333, so my botany students. And I had some homework. I went a little bit slower with this class. I did a few more explanations. And where did my form go? Here we go. Please tell me I didn't just close it. So this is what the form looked like for the students. Again, same thing. We went over the primary and secondary materials, broke them into groups, put them in groups. And then once they're in groups, everything's in the form. I had a little more space, and if I were doing the document version, again, I think I would embed the tweet as an image, because this seemed to work pretty well, because then they could stay here if they wanted. They were able to fill out each of the answers individually. In this particular case, the professor I was working with wasn't going to be in the classroom. She was off watching the eclipse, and so I got to work with the students, and she got to see the eclipse. So in this case, the form worked out better because I was able to give her then feedback on what each student was able to do, and we were able to follow up afterward on where students needed help or where they were still weak. Benefits of the form, of course, students can't delete each other's work. They can all work at their own pace, and just that follow-up opportunity, of course, is wonderful. It also gave me a little bit more freedom. It's strange. Whenever I've put students into Google Forms, they've done one of two things depending on the student. Some of them will rush through in an attempt to get it done as fast as they can, which is why I opted for sort of this longer scrolling form rather than sections on individual pages. I was trying to get them to take each step and see how it built on the next one. I think I may have slowed them down a little too much. It took much longer this time around, but again, these were younger students. It was the beginning of the school year. Teacher wasn't in the room, so I'm not quite sure what to attribute it to, if it's just form versus slide deck or if it was students or a combination of the things. Part of the drawback to the form also is they didn't work so much as a group. They really worked individually. It really turned into everybody working on one thing, which in and of itself isn't bad, but this isn't, I think it's a level appropriate exercise for them. It's something that they should be able to do, but I don't know that it's something I would expect them to be able to do by themselves on the first try. And so having them work individually, I ran into that. The other thing that happened is it made it harder for me to hit every student as I walked around the room. So in both of these classes, I had maybe 15 to 20 students, and there, of course, is only one of me. And some of the students who needed a little more help than others, I spent more time with them because they had more questions, and I inadvertently missed a few students. So that's something to bear in mind if you're doing this and as you're working the room, to kind of keep an eye out for some of what's going on. And if any of you have an idea of other iterations of this that I haven't seen, I'm sure I'm going to be teaching this again, and I would love to hear your thoughts on that. And then, of course, it's harder to see at a glance, since it is sort of wordy, where they are in the actual activity. Okay, and so some shortcomings of the way this assignment works and some ideas for future assignments, just things I've noticed. In this particular class, since it's a botany professor, the citation style we're using is that used by the American Journal of Botany, which I have to look up every time. And anytime you teach students a new citation style, fun ensues. So they will sometimes get caught up on the actual nuts and bolts of the citation, and they'll spend so much time getting that perfected that they're not actually working on the finding and working through how to go from clues within the news article to the further research. They're not really close to looking for clues in the text. So let me go back to, let's see. I'm showing you only the national park one, and I apologize, but you'll be able to go through and find that's the tweet again, and that's the news article. They're not used to going through here and actually seeing information like the person who did this study was Lytton and they had projects, or that it's the climate change response program. And even though they did remarkably well in the class conversation about talking about attribution and how journalists give credit to their sources and their research, if it's not a link, they almost don't see it as clues that you could go to and find something else yet. And I thought that was interesting and a little sad, and I think most of them sort of got it by the end of this, but I expected them to do a little bit better. But we'll keep working on it, and I'll keep making changes to this. And of course, please let me know what ideas you have, because I'm here to learn as much as to share something I've done. The other thing they've had a little bit of trouble with is they're used to keyword searching being subject searching, right? So if I tell them to find an article about climate change and national parks, they can all go and they can all hop on the database and find climate change. But for one of the groups, there's an interview with a local professor who worked on a scientific paper. And I think he was the third or fourth author. And they couldn't figure out how to search for him when I asked them to go and find the research. So that was something that they had a little bit of a hard time with, and it was a great learning opportunity for that group when I got to talk to them. But I know if one group was having trouble with it, maybe all the groups were. So next time, maybe I'll keep them all on the same tweet instead of breaking them up. But I always hope when I do this that they'll have time to share it out and share with each other what's going on. And then the last thing is, some students, by the time we get to the, go and find a similar article, and I can show you the responses from the form. Let me just find that. What had happened was, here it is, and I've hidden my students' names for now. So most of them did climate change within the national park, but some of them, I don't know if it's easy to see on the screen. You may just want to go through and take a look. But they found things like how it's related to, what did they find? It was like Indian elephant populations for climate change in the national parks in a botany class. So they're putting in some keywords, and they're putting in maybe climate change and maybe park, but they're not doing any sort of looking through the results list and truly thinking about the articles. And that may be a function of it being, you know, end of class, let's just get something done, especially since it's 75 minutes of this. But yeah, it was an interesting experience all around, but I like this activity. I think it's an opportunity to sort of show students the connections we have every day between different types of primary research and the news, and where things can go and how we share information. And I look forward to making more changes to it in the coming time. So that's all I had. Does anyone have any questions? Kristen, do I need to pass the thing back to you, or?
You can. Interesting.
Okay.
You can at this moment if you'd like, because I will need it to turn off the recording when we're done. I do have a few kind of like maybe get discussion going questions. I was curious, how do you select the references or tweets that you were using for your in-class activities, and do you have any tips for that? Because it can be very difficult sometimes, even for us, to, as librarians, to track from the a social media or a news reference back to the original primary source.
That's a good question. So what I did, luckily I had a pretty good set of lead time before I taught this for the first time. So really what I did was I hopped on to Twitter, and I knew that they were doing climate change, and I just did a basic search for climate change, and I clicked on a lot of, just a lot of links to see what was going to be something sort of interesting. I tried to go specifically so this one's from the Redwood National Park. Let me get back over here and see who else I had. I had one from NASA, so I tried to go from sort of science organizations. That would be pretty interesting. Let's see, ABC News. I think this one's been taken down in the interim. And then this one we didn't have a group for the first time around. And I think this one was just somebody I followed that it looked interesting. So some of it was just searching and trial and error. This one I found from doing a hashtag for global warming in plants. But I liked that it's KQED, which is our local public broadcast network, so we were able to then go to something fairly local that the students might have some exposure with later. And so that was pretty much how I did it. Yeah, so it does take a little bit of prep work, and I'll probably have to update the social media posts I use, if not this year, probably next year, just so they don't get too old. But it was an interesting way to get the students to look at this, because I think they're so used to social media as just for their social life, and they won't admit that they get news from it, but I know they do.
Mm-hmm.
So. Did that answer?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Let's see. Does anybody else have any other questions?
Or any ideas on how I can improve this? Here to learn from you too. Must be lunchtime, everybody's quiet.
Mm-hmm.
Did anybody have a particular class in mind that they thought this might work for, that, or how you're gonna maybe be able to use it? Sorry, I talked fast.
Let's see. Allison says, I do something similar in the first year, but not involving Twitter.
Yeah, I'm not, Twitter was interesting. Most of them, students begin with a news article and do the actual study. That's what I do with my earth science students, and that worked pretty well. Most of them don't use Twitter. I wonder if Facebook might be better, but again, most of them are going away from Facebook, and I don't know if this sort of information is really on Instagram. I'm still pretty new to that one, so I need to explore. And of course, if you're interested, you can always get in contact with me, and I will share my lesson plan for what I do with my juniors so you can see what they're doing in the class, usually right before this, so that they're already looking at primary and secondary materials. Because if they don't have an idea of the difference, they may have a harder time.
Christine says, I have a biology class that is students who will be science teachers. I think this could be very useful for them on a variety of levels. I'm wondering, Christine, if you have any ideas on, if you could expand a little bit on what those levels you think this would be really helpful for. I'm curious to hear more. Well, and in the meantime, Maria Michelle, another kind of quick question that I had was, have you done any sort of assessment for this particular lesson plan teaching? About what the students have learned or what they're taking away from it, and if not, do you have any ideas about how you would possibly do assessment for this in the future?
That's a good question, and very timely, actually. I'm meeting with our information literacy coordinator to talk to her about doing something. We did something with our psychology capstone last year in terms of looking at students' final projects after they came into the library to see if they're getting out of these sessions what we want them to get out of it. Right now I just have the actual artifacts from the class, and that's part of why I do Google Forms and Google Docs, because then at least I have copies of their answers, and even if I do the lesson again, I just have to sort of switch out the links, and then I have it ready for the next class. But I've had discussions with the instructor, and right now it's just all on NEC data. But we're hoping in our discussion later today with the information literacy coordinator and myself to maybe take a look at some of the classes I've taught in and look at their final assignments, or maybe the assignments that came immediately after this, to see what students are doing, how they're citing, the sort of mechanical parts of what they're working on. It's a little bit harder sometimes in the sciences because there's a little bit less instruction overall. But than say like my colleagues in English or communications or even the social sciences. But I think it could be fruitful to follow up.
Okay, thank you. So let's see here. Let's see, Christina responded with not just to teach them about mining for sources, but to encourage their future students to use social media for actual information, which, yeah, that'd be really great. And then Allison asked, do you ask the students if they have personal accounts on any social media platform or which they do use to follow current events?
I've asked them in passing. Normally what happens is I'm seeing the students, sometimes I'll have repeat students, but I don't get much information of them before the class. So it's meeting during the initial discussion. So by that time the activity is already set up. I know quite a few of them are on Instagram. I have asked them what they tend to use, and they all get a little sly and a little quiet. A good number of them are on Snapchat, and a number of them are on, like I said, Instagram. It looks like Allison said Reddit might be a good choice. Reddit might be interesting. I haven't thought about that. I'll write that one down and see if maybe that's something to explore. Maybe doing something like this and letting them self-select into the social media feed that they're interested in might also give me some insight into what most of them are using, and then recalibrate the assignment for future semesters based on their answers. If they get quiet, I could ask them with I probably could. It would take longer to set up the poll through like a Kahoot or a Poll Everywhere, and then I'd have to pull them back, but that is a great idea. Or maybe ask them to fill out some information before the class starts. But I will keep that in mind. Thank you. Anything else I can show or answer? I hope you enjoyed it. Feels a little strange to be talking to my computer doing this instead of a room of people.
Okay, yeah, it looks like we are going to wrap up then. Once again, Mary, thank you so much for a really great, interesting presentation. For those who are interested in the resources or anything like that, I know we will be posting the recording of the chat will be posted on the STS Information Literacy chat LibGuide, which I can share with you guys quick. Should have thought of this before.
Let's see, and it's taking just a second for me to stop sharing my screen so I can pass it to you.
Okay. So yes, thank you everybody for attending, and I hope that everyone has a great day and a great weekend.